Hello, everybody. So sorry for the delay today by about 17 minutes. We're having a little bit of a technical issue getting the StreamYard to work with our cameras, but we're all set now. So we're going to go ahead and hit the ground running. And I'm going to bring in Bob Sadler, who's our communications coach. Today he's going to talk a little bit about the subject that he's covering. And we'll give about a 20-minute sort of overview of it. And then we can do some questions and discussion. So with that, Bob, I'll let you take it away.
All right. One of these sessions, I'm focusing a bit on one of these four factors. And today, I really want to focus on fact and rationale. Again, it's only 10% of what it takes to move listeners to a point where they support you. But you do have to get it right. And we don't want to just pour that information in to other people, and you can't really do that unless you've made a connection. So I love this metaphor of fueling this jet in mid-flight. You can't just turn the fuel on until you've made a connection. Otherwise, it just washes over the jet. In this case, would probably blow it up. So you need to make the connection, and that connection comes through all four of the factors that we just talked about. Obviously, you want the data to be good, you want the logic to be good. And if you're going to present it with PowerPoint, which a lot of us are doing, following a 10-20-30 rule makes the most sense. For a 20-minute talk, which really is about maximum length that you're going to get full attention. And in fact, that's been shrinking. I noticed TED Talks, for instance, have gone from 18-minute max down to 12 or 13 minute. And watching a few of them, it actually does feel like enough. And so trying to stay within that time constraint is really important. You can stay on stage longer, but something dramatically has to change after 20 minutes. One way to do that is to go into Q&A, and that breaks it up considerably, or Q&A for 10 minutes and then back to another 10 to 20 minute piece. but you just can't go on and on and on and expect the crowd to stay with you. It's way past most people's attention span, and they get antsy after that 20 minutes. The 10 means try to keep it, if it's 20 minutes, try to keep it to 10 slides or one slide for about 2 minutes. And really those slides are not supposed to have a lot of small font on them, because if you do put small font, people will be reading the font. And then when they're reading the font and concentrating on that, they're not actually listening. People don't do two things at once very well. So don't put something up that's going to compete with you. It just doesn't make any sense. You can use some words like I've done on this slide, but it's all 30 point or above. You want to try to make it memorable using props, metaphors, simile, analogies are ways of making some of these points more memorable. And you want to be really clear, simple sentences, drop the qualifiers, which I find is a really big problem, especially with people who are coming at open air from a science or engineering background where you're never quite sure about anything you're saying, because that's how science and engineering are. You're doing your best, but most people talking will qualify what they're saying. And those qualifiers take the power out of what you're saying. So what I mean is we could say, well, this particular science is probably the best for taking carbon dioxide out of the air at the best cost. Well, when I put probably in there, I qualified it. There was no need to put that in there. It's the best we know of so far. It's the best. For a variety of reasons, it's the best. We may find that there's something better, but we don't know that yet. It's a much more sure-footed sentence to drop the qualifiers. And we're loaded with them. I think we believe we have to use the qualifiers to be liked. And we're very interested in being liked. And likable is important, but it doesn't come because of qualifiers. And to drop the jargon as much as possible, even if the audience understands the jargon, it registers better to say some things in longer hand than to use the jargon over and over. Because you're saying something that's different from what they're used to hearing. They're not used to hearing the whole description of all the right words. They're used to hearing an acronym. Giving them the words, or at least enough of the words, rather than the jargon, gets better attention. So those are just a few things that what I would add to the list, and I didn't want to make it more than 3 things on that slide, but overriding this is another, I think, helpful thought, and that is to try to keep yourself to 3 major points. It's much easier for the listener to stay organized with your thinking if you can stay to 3s. Once you get to 4 and 5 things, they're not as memorable. Staying with 3. And then because you're going to have more to say than just those 3 things, maybe within, like if I say, well, these are my 3 things, within good data, there may be 3 things that back up that idea that I want to talk about, but not 4 or 5. Making something memorable, props, metaphors, similes, Analogies are really another word for those. That's about as much as I'm going to be able to talk about in terms of making it memorable. There are other things I could do, there are other things I could talk about, but keeping it to the big things really makes more sense. Being clear, okay, that means simple sentences, drop the qualifiers, drop the jargon. There are other things we can talk about, but those are the big three. So here's a page organized in threes, 3 points and 3 things in each point. The crowd can follow that. But when you go beyond that, they're not likely to take it away, and it's not likely to be any more convincing. And then you really have to wrap those in a story, but that's a topic for another day. So let me just stop there and see if you have any comments or questions. Anyone, any thoughts? Does that make sense to everyone?
It does. I wonder if there's a kind of do you have an example that kind of illustrates that, or Peter, I know you had a couple questions, but it does.
Yeah, I wanted to just ask Bob, if you drop the qualifiers, like I'm thinking in carbon removal terms, like if you drop the qualifiers on it, and I say there's 1,000 excess gigatons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then if I just say that, I don't qualify it with plus or minus or according to blah blah blah, I just say that, then I risk somebody objecting or throwing out some other counter information.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think almost you can say there's 1,000. What's the term? 1,000 gigatons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We believe there's 1,000 gigatons, plus or minus, that we have to take out of the atmosphere. But the qualifier that I worry about that's not what I mean. There are these fillers that people use.
Yeah, you talked about like probably or
yeah. It probably about 1,000 gigatons is unnecessary. About 1,000 gigatons. And someone might ask you what your source is, and you give it to them. But I wouldn't give them the source unless they ask. So there's about 1,000 gigatons in the atmosphere. There's more or less about it gets qualified before you qualify it. I mean, about 1,000 tons is about right. 1,000 plus or minus would be fine.
Okay.
But not almost about, or almost 1,000 plus or minus, or some people think are those qualifiers just take any feeling of authority out of a sentence.
Great.
So you want to be accurate, but you don't want to qualify it much.
Great. Well, let me just quickly intervene here for those who are joining. Bob, Peter, I know you can't see this, but we have 18 people who are watching us right now from the live stream. So I just want to welcome those folks. Thanks for tuning in to Communicator. This is a weekly session that we did as a closed Zoom group for the last several months, and we're lucky to have Bob Sadler, who has many decades of experience as a communication coach for both advocates as well as scientists. We can get into some of his clients as we go today and on future calls. But our open air community has really benefited from Bob taking on different special subjects, or sometimes we have particular communication needs, and he helps us sort of move through and make those better and gain more comfort as communicators, whether it's we're talking to a group of people live or we're testifying at a hearing for a carbon removal bill. And so this is the first week we decided to open up the window and stream it. And so you might be watching from LinkedIn or StreamYard or X, but we'll be doing these at the same time on Wednesdays with special themes. So want to thank folks for joining. And if anybody has any questions, you can pop those in the StreamYard chat and I can ask Bob directly. All right, thanks guys.
And also, I'll just add, Chris, that in these sessions, we welcome people who are practicing a presentation or have something coming up that Bob gives us access to some really good coaching. You can practice and get real-time feedback and improve your presentations or whatever it is you're doing.
And that's often what we have here, whether it's an activist that's working on one of our bills and they have a big meeting coming up, they can actually work through this with this sort of soft audience and some feedback, as well as Bob's excellent, again, coaching and tips. So that's what you can expect in future calls.
So if you take those bits of advice on getting the facts right, what really becomes critical is that those facts aren't delivered as a series of facts. And what the real work has to be to develop a narrative structure and use that narrative structure to deliver those facts. So if I go back to the screen share, let me fit the two things together. The story structure that works most easily, there are about 7 major story structures in literature, but the one that works for us, that's pretty easy to remember, is this: that we have a problem, it's bigger than you think, but we have a solution, and the value of that solution is X. That story structure works because in terms of human emotion, when you start describing a problem, if you're effective at it, the listener starts to build tension because the problem you're describing is a bit disconcerting, frightening, horrifying. And as you describe the problem, they feel more tense and then the next part of that structure, which is, and this problem is much bigger than you think and more complex and much harder to solve than you would imagine. That builds even more tension. So you've got a problem, the problem is bigger than you think. And once the audience is at maximum tension, then they're ready to hear about solution. If they don't, if the solutions you want to talk about in terms of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in various ways, those solutions aren't going to land as well if they don't relieve tension that you've created in the audience. And once your solutions do begin to take shape and they feel relieved that there may be a way out of this, then they really appreciate the solution, are much more willing to hear it. If you don't talk about the problem and you don't build tension, then when you get talking about a solution, it's more like an academic exercise, and it's about competing facts, and things go south very fast. So the discipline, even though you're there to talk about the solution, is to make sure everybody's reminded of the problem and how difficult it is to solve that problem. So here's what you could do with facts and rationale. When we talk about we have a problem, you could put 3 big problem items in there. And when you talk about bigger than you think, you can put 3 complications in there that make this very hard to solve. And then when you talk about solutions, even though there are probably 5 or 6 sciences you'd like to talk about, you could say, let me just talk about the big 3, the ones that I'm thinking we have maybe the best potential in at the moment. And focus on 3, not 5 or 6 or 7, 3. And then within each of those 3, maybe 3 features that make that particular one worthy of going after. And then when you get to value, maybe 3 more ways that it's valuable. So it's 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, all the way through that storyline. And although this looks like a relatively simple thing to do, it's enormously helpful in coming up with your next presentation if you're not already doing something like that.
Bob,
So, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question here that's very specific to the subject that we deal with climate change, right?
Yeah.
Is that what I sense, and I have for a long time, is that it's all anxiety without resolution, right? And the rhetorical style of talking about climate change is, oh, we're screwed, you know. And then it kind of, and I think we're well past the sort of a saturation point where I think people have kind of tuned out from it. So I wonder if there's almost like a prologue approach where you give people a sense up front that we are here to talk about an actual solution. And then you go into, here are the problems, and they are much worse than we think. You know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying? And I wonder if it's very unique to this world that we deal with in climate change, that I'm almost trying to think of, is there kind of a silver lining that you can preview at the beginning so that people aren't like, uh-oh, this is another doom and gloom. You know, I don't know. I'm just, maybe I'm overthinking.
You could create what is we've talked about before as a hook, and start with a preview of a solution, a very exciting feature of one particular science that would take I could start off a talk saying, last week we took at this particular site 7 tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it back in the ground where it can't come back out.
I like that.
And I can't wait to tell you the details of that. But I have to apologize and stop and just say, look, before I get into this, I want to share with you how I'm feeling about our situation. It really is dire. And then do that problem climb. I think it's a mistake not to do it. I think you could apologize on your way in. I think you could give them a sense that you've got a solution to talk about. But I would take them on that ride.
I guess an example of what you described that Gabrielle Walker did in the presentation, she put the woolly pig, that people are like, I got to find out what she means by the woolly pig. So it gives you kind of a reason.
I mean, that was definitely a good hook.
Yeah.
But I think you could also take them on a 1-minute video clip of a program in Africa where they're putting biochar, and because of that, they've been able to measure 15 times carbon dioxide absorption than would have normally happened. Mm-hmm. And the crops are better. And you could actually say that that's just one example of what I want to talk to you about. And I'm going to get there in a minute, but I got to say, things are worse than I thought they were. You know, I mean, every day I open the paper, it's like we're at just another level of tragedy. I mean, I spent the last week looking at trying to figure out what's going to happen to insurance.
Yeah.
And what will happen when insurance collapses on housing. And it's just all over the news every day. It is, and the ocean temperature rise, much worse than we thought. No, I think we have to keep focused on reminding people of the problem, reminding them how difficult it is. Now, let me get back to some solutions. And then the relief is even greater. So I think you could use it as a hook and probably accomplish what you're trying to do, Chris.
And you just gave me a great idea where you could start off, let's say, a thing we always try to remind people of is talk about how this might look where you are, or at least it's relevant to the audience that you have, that you could start off with this sort of intriguing, and it'll be sort of unfamiliar to people, image of a particular carbon removal real world practice that's relevant. And then you could go through it, you go through those problems. And then when you go with the solutions to the rule of three, you show one solution that's not that one, that's happening in another place, a very different type of solution that's different from the first one that's happening in another place. And then you land back on the one that you started with that then brings it back home.
Right.
Could be a way of doing that.
Or I could start with a hook that's saying, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory has done a magnificent piece of work and says that Monterey County by the year X has to remove our fair share in this county where I'm speaking is 200 million tons of carbon dioxide or whatever it is. And the best way for us to get that out is through forest management. And it can be done. But let me just pause and say why it has to be done, and then start up that storyline. And then finish on, let's talk about how we do that here. How do we get rid of that much carbon dioxide in this county using forest management? What do we have to do? What could you do?
I like it.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to have to get my act together for another project that is looming for 1 o'clock in our time. So I will look forward to seeing you next week.
Are we on next week, Peter? Okay.
One more. Yes, one more week.
And then I have a couple of other commitments for a couple of weeks.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank the 20 people who are Zooming in right now. There'll be a list for this event for next week, same time, probably with a few more people. And again, apologies for the technical delays that set us back about 15 minutes, but that was actually excellent. I kind of like those short encapsulated sessions there. But thank you so much, Bob, as always. And we'll see you all next week.